10 musicians, not singers, 10 musicians that joined a band, a successful band that, well, I'll say successful, with a deal and got albums coming out, but weren't quite that band. And then this guy comes in, or girl, and before you know it, they become the band they were meant to be. What are the 10 greatest examples of that? In other words, what are the 10 greatest musicians who took their band to another level? In brackets, no singers, close brackets. Now, I will put 3 singers on here because they're so bloody obvious. And originally I included them and they skewed the list off. So I thought I'll do a separate top 10 for singers who changed the band. And then I got into the mire and I only had really 3 choices. So I'll say those at the end so that you know I haven't forgotten them. But this is musicians. And you know, it's an incredible thing to have a band, you know, a band of musicians. And then someone leaves, oh my God, what should we do? So you bring in a bass player or a drummer and the next thing, that band's at that level. So at number 10, the first one on the list, I believe, solidified this band and turned it into a band of absolute genius. The only problem with this is there will be people who are fans of this band that will say that the 3 albums that came before this guy were some of their best albums, and they won't agree. So this is why this guy is only at number 10 on the list. It's a drummer, John Weathers. So John Weathers joined in 1972-73-ish the progressive rock band Gentle Giant, and for me he's the missing piece in the jigsaw, although mentioning that in relation to Gentle Giant can not always be wise, because the missing piece is not one of their best albums, and the follow-up Giant for a Day is pretty awful, and John Weathers played on both, right? And so we have an arc with Gentle Giant, and that goes like this. First album comes out in 1970. It's called Gentle Giant. Before that, Gentle Giant had been like a pop band, and they'd had a hit single called Kites, and they got another name, and I'm afraid that name escapes me. A little bit like the names of those wizards escape Gandalf when asked about the other 2 wizards. Yeah, I can't quite remember, but he's got a reason not to remember. I haven't really, and I'm treading water in the case it does pop into my head. It's just a senior blank I've had. It ain't gonna happen. So they've had this pop career, but they want to do something far more experimental. And so in 1970, they move over to prog. That's when prog's happening. Their first album, Gentle Giant, when seen in the history of prog, is a very groundbreaking album. But without doubt, it is not the Gentle Giant sound. Then they decide to really push the envelope out and probably do their most way out album, which is called Acquiring the Taste, an album that I think is absolutely brilliant and thus begins their run of genius albums. They follow that up, change their drummer, can't remember the name of their first drummer, but they change it to a very competent, detailed drummer called Malcolm Mortimer, very technically able. And he comes in and does the prog thing of dotting all the I's and crossing the T's on an album, concept album called 3 Friends. Now, for many people, this is Gentle Giant's greatest album. And it is an absolutely incredible album. And for a while, it was my favourite Gentle Giant album. But what I really love about Gentle Giant is what John Weathers brings to it. John Weathers comes in just after 3 Friends, picks up that tour, and then they go back into the studio and they make Octopus. Now, I think, objectively, Octopus, well, it's a masterpiece. Is it any better than 3 Friends? I don't know. But from this point on, there is a funkiness and a grooviness, and also there is there's a balance to the complexity of Gentle Giant. Gentle Giant are perhaps, along with Frank Zappa and Henry Cow, they're the 3 most complex rock bands that has ever existed. John Weathers' genius is to plough, these really groovy, heavy markers all the way through. He could keep up with the complexity. It's harder to do this in a way. Sometimes when you are faced with complexity as a drummer, to just copy exactly like you're just mirroring the phrasing note for note Is it easier than going, well, how much am I going to dip in and where am I going to dip out? And so you then start to create almost like a contrary part. And Gentle Giant was always like that. It was always like a Swiss watch with these contrary parts balancing each other. For me, much as I love those early albums, the Gentle Giant sound just becomes sublime. And from this moment on, up until I would say Interview, they create masterpiece after masterpiece. Doesn't matter what album you want to go and buy Freehand or In a Glass House or anyone's, The Power and the Glory, Interview, all of those albums there, and especially Play the Fool, the live album. That is a run of absolute sublime prog. It's comparable to Stevie Wonder's run in the 70s, from Music in the Mind onwards. It's an incredible run. Incredible set of albums, and John Weathers just nails it. He is the drummer of Gentle Giant, and that's it. But of course, people would disagree, so I have him down at number 10. I think from now on, most people who agree with these. At number 9, I've got Martin Barre. So, as we all know, Jethro Tull emerges very early in the history of progressive rock, their first album coming out in 1968. And at that time, they're a blues rock band. Ian Anderson has a vision, and his own vision, which is a sort of consideration of English, British folk music, but also a sort of mythical idea of England, Britain, the introduction of the English aesthetic, combined with surreal sort of Lewis Carroll type imagery. This did not chime with Mick Abrams, who was basically a blues guitarist, and so he jumped ship. Now Martin Barre, I believe, comes in as quite a young man and quite a malleable young man, but able to project guitar parts which are some of the most complex and challenging guitar parts of any band at any time. I feel that if at that point in 69, when Martin Barre came in, if he'd just been another run-of-the-mill post Eric Clapton blues guitarist, we would have no Jethro Tull. At that point when he comes in, Clive Bunker is a brilliant drummer. Glenn Cornick is a wild but great bass player. That's already there. That foundation is there. The key to Jethro Tull is Martin Barre coming in. And then from then on, they have a number of changes with Bunker going, Glenn Cornick going, and other musicians come in and the sound starts to change. And it could be another musician wouldn't have been able to keep up. Martin Barre, this never is the case. Martin Barre is the musician textbook that comes in and takes Jethro Tull to the next level. Now, I have often felt, and I'll say this here, that their greatest album is Stand Up. Some people think it's Benefit. But that early statement there is not only sublime and brilliant, but back in 69 when Stand Up came out, this rivals King Crimson as being the birthplace of prog. When I listened to Barre, and all the stuff that's going on in there, I go, well, that's prog. And unlike King Crimson, they keep that up all the way through the album. There's all sorts of things going on. And of course, that album also sees, what's the name of the track? Which was ripped off by the Eagles in Hotel California. I'm not singing Hotel California. I'm singing this song. You can put it in the comments. I wish my brain could retain everything, but it can't. But so Stand Up's incredible. And that's what happens when Martin Barre joins the band. Brilliant. Right. At number 8 on my list of musicians who took the band to another level, I have got Steve Hillage. From Gong. How much do we love Steve Hillage? I love Steve Hillage. How much do we love his albums in the 70s? Starting with Fish Rising and then going on to L, and then you got Green, Radio Dome Music, you got Live Herald. How incredible are all Steve Hillage's albums? Why? Because Steve Hillage is bloody brilliant, isn't he? That blissed out, trippy guitar playing, which is like sounds light years ahead of any guitarist at that time. So liquid and beautiful, and he just has this sort of trippy thing going on. He's absolutely amazing, and he made his name, you know, by the early 70s in the band Khan. He is a progressive rock giant, and so he should be. Then we have Gong, one of my favourite bands of all time. But I have to say, David Allen did fart around, you know, going around France, picking up all sorts of weirdos and making up, you know, albums like Mother Gong. And then he nearly gets there with Camembert Electric, and then Hillage joins. And with Hillage, he goes into the studio and makes Radio Gnome, Flying Teapot, starts all that. Now, yeah, you're going to say Steve Hillage's input into that radio, you know, the Radio Gnome music, the Flying Teapot album, is what it is. You know, just join the band. But I hear a difference. I think that David Allen was the great sort of figurehead, right? Like James Brown was in the James Brown band, but Steve Hillage was like the Bootsy Collins, right? He brings something to it. By Angel's Egg, and the addition of Pierre Morland, who I think is another key member, but I think they're on their way on Angel's Egg, and then we get, you know, You. That run of albums is absolutely incredible. But the live albums that come out at that time, you know, Gong Es Mort, absolutely, it's an incredible, and it's a short-lived run of really amazing albums. The last one we see Hillage on is Shamal, and then once he's gone, Gong itself slowly turns into a jazz rock fusion band, which I absolutely love. But Hillage takes that sort of tripped out, blissed out, you know, hippie spirit. And so if you want that line, you just jump across to Fish Rising, and he takes you all the way from there to some sort of weird ambient electronic dance music. And he's the link between that. He's an incredibly important musician. I don't think he gets the credit he should. And he made Gong amazing. Before then, they were amazing. If you want to say Camembert Electric, yeah, You Can't Kill Me is amazing. I love it. But that's the only good track on that album. Right? And all it is just a repeated riff with a whole bunch of sort of free jazz going over the top. It's not Angel's Egg, sorry. So I'm championing Steve Hillage there. Absolutely incredible. At number 7, I have, and I'm no expert on this band, so I apologise, but I'm quite aware that this is the case. I have at number 7, Marty Friedman joining Megadeth. Megadeth are the sort of raspberry and nose twiddle to Metallica that Dave Mustaine did when they kicked him out. Oh, show you, you know, ginger, angry and jealous. That is what drives Megadeth. And they're great. And in a way, they come out and everything that Metallica was doing, they're doing times 10. And great Megadeth are. But the difference between Megadeth and Metallica, it is Dave Mustaine's band. And so he can bring in musicians that are far greater in their virtuosity than Metallica, or the guys in Anthrax, or the guys in Slayer. And this is what happens in Megadeth. A number of people have built it. I always thought Nick Menza was an incredible drummer, but for me, it's Marty Friedman. Now, Marty Friedman as a guitar player was incredible influential on me. Not so much the Megadeth stuff. What was the band he was in before? Was it Cacophony? I think he was in Cacophony with Jason Becker, and they were both unbelievable. Mike Friedman used a technique called economy picking, and I learnt that and read about it, and I pursued that. Now many people say it was a mistake, but it does enable you to access incredibly fast lines on the guitar, which Marty Friedman did. There's a jazz flowingness to this, you know. So I think once Marty Friedman leaves Cacophony and he's brought into Megadeth, this is one of those examples of a sort of mainstream metal brand going towards that sort of virtuoso end of the market. And I just think those two albums, Rust in Peace and Countdown to Extinction, they're just on another level in terms of thrash metal. Martin Friedman made that band, and in a way, it was him that enabled Dave Mustaine to trump Metallica in a way. Wish I knew more about it, but that's where I put him in. I knew he had to go on the list. Right, so At number 6 on the list, I've got When Bill Bruford Joins King Crimson. Let's be honest about King Crimson. Very influential, but they are one of those sort of flowery, doomy bands, which I think I'm not a big fan of. Van der Graaf Generator personify that to me. Also Trespass by Genesis. I've never been a fan of this stuff. I like stuff that rocks and kicks and has a bit of guts, you know, and flapping around in a sort of netherworld of doomy Englishness. It's not my thing, you know. I like it, but I like someone to get in there and kick it up the bum at the same time. So for me, King Crimson's are great. In the Court of the Crimson King is great. You know, then they follow it up with the one that comes after that one, which is, of course, any progressive rock nerd like myself will know. It's called, I forgot what it's bloody called. See, all rubbish today. Bloody stupid band. In the wake of Poseidon. Forgot what it was bloody called. You know why? Because in the wake of Poseidon, it's them trying to do In the Court of the Crimson King again, and it's just like a sort of, you can't really tell which one's which. It's okay, it's good. Then they do Lizard and Islands. Don't like those albums particularly. You know, I've never liked them. Never liked them. So for me, and I was having this conversation with Matt Stevens from The Fierce and the Dead, King Crimson don't start till 1972. Right? When Fripp just dissolves it all, then puts that band together. Now, they all play a part. John Wetton plays a part. Jamie Muir plays a huge part. Maybe it should be Jamie Muir on this list. I think I'm going to have to change it, actually. I think it is Jamie Muir. I think it's Bruford putting his future and putting the art and how his future configures with art and what he wants to say. He's an incredible musician for putting that first. So although he's in the biggest band in the world at that time, he jumped ship to King Crimson. That's a very brave move. And he hooks up with Jamie Muir. And I think Jamie Muir takes Bruford up to another level at this point. And what Bruford then starts to do with Fripp, John Wetton's there supporting it, great vocalist, charismatic, great big thick bass sound. And it's those four. David Crosset is there, of course, playing violin, but I don't feel that's the key to it. It's Jamie Muir through Bill Bruford. That's who it is. So you know, when I got to this and said it was Bruford, you saw there was a picture of Jamie Muir. It's Jamie Muir. He's the one that takes it to another level. Why? What does he bring into it? He brings in heavy metal. Literally, he's thrown chains across the stage. He's uncoiling stuff. He's like running around spitting blood. He's as much Gene Simmons as he is, say, I don't know, Tony Oxley, a free jazz, percussionist drummer, which he is as well. He's also part monk as well. There's a spiritual dimension to it. Jamie Muir. Yeah, Jamie Muir's the guy. You know, he brings in something to Crimson. And what they do there, that dark industrial proto-metal prog, all weird and satanic, but at the same time spiritual, is incredible. It's one of my favourite sounds in the history of all music. Is the sound of King Crimson in the 70s. Those 3 albums they do, USA, the live album you can count as well if you want, they're just incredible. So yeah, I really rate Jamie Muir, not Bill Bruford, sorry Bill, Jamie Muir, his input into King Crimson it's only one album. It's just like Songs in Aspic, but it sticks. Right, at number 5, I have got Scott Gorham. Right, Scott Gorham comes into Thin Lizzy around about 1975. I think the first album they do together is Fighting. Is that the name of the album? Not too sure. Have a drink of behind you. Sorry about a bit of dribble then. That's what happens when you're growing a moustache like this. I did put some tissues out because I thought that might happen. I didn't want to upset you and make it look like I'm some sort of oaf. you know, and not able to keep my chops clean when drinking orange juice. Scott Gorham, yeah, we all know the story of Thin Lizzy. You know, Phil Lynott is an incredibly talented songwriter, singer, frontman, a good bass player. He brings together sort of a psychedelic approach to rock music, which was very the thing back in, say, 1970, and he puts that together with sort of this sort of Irish cultural roots, even though he is an outsider to that in a way. And it's an incredible mixture of stuff, you know. Now, they don't just do that. If you go and listen to the first albums, I'm not a big fan of the first few Thin Lizzy albums. Don't sound like Thin Lizzy, but they experiment a lot. But of course, with Eric Bell in the band, and then their addition of a very Irish sounding Whiskey in the Jar, they have a hit record with that, and that's what they get known for. But for me, Thin Lizzy is that, you know, bite-in, heavier, more American sounding rock sound with the twin lead guitars, you know, and it's a certain thing, and I love it. Now, this really is brought about by the inclusion of Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson. But Brian Robertson, who is a bit of a drinker, a bit of a fighter, seems to start coming in and out of the band, and when he's out, they bring in Gary Moore, which is a brilliant, you know, musician to bring in. And they forged a number of albums. Now, I don't believe in terms of studio albums, Thin Lizzy really nail it. It's up and down. A lot of this is to do with drugs, right? But one constant through this, so when this guy comes in to when this guy goes, it changes Thin Lizzy, Scott Gorham. Now, in 2004, after Lynott's death, John Sykes, who'd been the last guitarist to come in and played on the incredible Thunder and Lightning, which I think is my favourite Lizzy album actually, he decided to reform Thin Lizzy with him singing and playing guitar, with the late great Michael Lee on drums. Can't remember who was on bass, but the thing that made it Thin Lizzy was the inclusion of Scott Gorham. He, I believe, holds the spiritual, you know, flame of Lizzy. And I opened up on that tour. I was playing with the blues guitarist called Ian Parker, so we opened up on about 4 dates across the UK. So I spent some time with them and spent some time with Scott. And I remember watching it and thinking, John Sykes is doing a brilliant job sounding like Lynott. It's incredible. But the reason I feel it is Thin Lizzy and not a tribute to Thin Lizzy is because Scott Gorham's on stage. And so that is how powerful his imprint is on this band once he came in. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Thin Lizzy aren't really Thin Lizzy. There's something else. And you might like that stuff, but when Scott Gorham comes in to Phil Lynott's death and the dissolution of Thin Lizzy, which I think happened a little bit earlier, he is the guy that makes Thin Lizzy Thin Lizzy. I think that goes without saying. So that's who we've got number 5. At number 4, I have Michael Schenker. Now, Michael Schenker came to prominence as a very, very young guitarist. I think he was about 14 or 15 on his big brother's, the band that belonged to his big brother Rudolf Schenker, the Scorpions. He plays on their first album, and he's great on it. They go out on tour with UFO. UFO needs a guitarist. So at around about the age of 17, Schenker moves over and joins UFO. And he appears on the first album he plays on by UFO is Phenomenon. Now, I absolutely love UFO, but I got to be honest, my interest in UFO is from Schenker joining on Phenomenon all the way up to their incredible Strangers in the Night live album, and then he goes. And for me, at the time being into this stuff, he took me with him, and I just started to listen to the Michael Schenker group, and the first Michael Schenker album and then the follow-up with the Cozy Powell on drums, they were just like part of the UFO thing for me. Now, it has to be said that the 2 albums or whatever it is that predate Phenomenon before Schenker gets in the band, not only do they not sound like UFO, but they're appalling. Now, if you say, what are they like? It's some sort of space rock, sort of tripped out, proggy space rock. That's the way I describe it. And you'll probably think, oh my God, UFO doing that, it's going to be amazing. It's just not amazing. Those early albums are rubbish. And the change is literally phenomenal. When you put on, and I put it on last night again, the album Phenomenon, you could feel how UFO do have their feet in that sort of space rock, psychedelic, acid rock sound. It's there somewhat. But Schenker coming in, especially at such a young age, he just changes it. And then you're listening, and then a track like Doctor Doctor comes on, or Rock Bottom. And that is UFO. And Doctor Doctor, in terms of that incredible voice that Phil Mogg had, incredible songwriting with all the twisted turns, the riffage, Schenker's incredible guitar solos, and just the sound and chemistry of that band. It's all there on that. They don't need to run up to it. This is all Schenker. Right, Schenker also looks amazing. He's just dripping with charisma. He's handsome. He's got the flying beat. He's iconic. And he really ushers in, on that album 1974, a new realm of guitarists that are not going to be so reliant on the blues rock of Clapton and Hendrix and all that lot. It's going to be spiky. It's going to be metalier. That's basically what's going to happen. Of course, replacing him in Scorpions comes in the genius of Uli John Roth. Then we get Eddie Van Halen merges. A few years later, there's a couple of other guitarists, some of the stuff that's going on with Judas Priest. And this really is not only laying the ground for heavy metal, but it's also laying the ground for all that guitar stuff that's going to happen in the 1980s. Schenker's important. UFO amazing. They're underrated. God knows why we don't talk about them in the same breath as a Black Sabbath or an Iron Maiden. I don't get it. They were huge at the time. They had hit records. I don't get it, but that's another video in it. But Schenker made that band. That's the bottom line. At number 3, I have Steve Howe.
Yes! Yes!
Yes, with Peter Banks are okay. They make 2 albums, the debut Yes album, and then they do Time in a Word. And then Peter Banks gets a bit fed up with the direction of the band because it's going a certain way. And they bring in the absolute virtuoso that is Steve Howe, who at that moment in time was playing in a psychedelic band called Tomorrow, who had this, did they have a hit record? Was it Bike? I can't remember. Or was Mine Bike? I can't remember. But anyway, I have friends who were on the scene in London, 68, 69, and they said, you know, he was astonishing at the time. He could do all the jazz lines, play the legato stuff. He could do slide guitar, flamenco guitar, folk finger picking, you know, Charlie Christian style jazz guitar, right? He could do all that and even scream sort of through the blues. He was something else, Steve Howe. And him coming into Yes with John Anderson's vision, they go from making 2 sort of okay albums that, you know, have the Yes sound, because the Yes sound is John Anderson's voice. But when he joins, the Yes album is just, I mean, some people think it's the greatest Yes album. Yeah, we've still got Tony Kaye. He doesn't want to play all the synthesizers like Rick Wakeman does. Rick Wakeman comes in and he dots the I's and he crosses the T's. But for me, the first genius album by Yes is the Yes album. It's all Steve Howe. The inclusion of the clap on there just shows that he's just blown everybody away. It's like, look who we got in the band. Well, we'll put you on the album. We'll give you a solo spot. Yeah, put him on the album. He's amazing. They're showing him off. He's incredible. Now, I got offered to do a gig with Peter Banks, and we were going to play at Rozfest, do like a little jam. Adam Booker, who has depped for me in my Butterfly Mind band every now and then, he was drumming for Peter Banks. We get to the airport and Peter Banks turns up and he hasn't told anybody his proper name. We can't get his tickets, and so the whole gig was cancelled down to his ineptitude. It seemed that Peter Banks was not built of the same stock as someone like Steve Howe, in that he was very much freer, wanted to jam, wanted to experiment. You know, of course, we did go on to have his band Flash, was it? Not much came of them. So I think Yes is it's down to Steve Howe. Now, Steve Howe has since become a very grumpy old man that looks absolutely terrifying. You know, his face is sort of it's like I don't know if you've ever seen that Hammer horror film She. It's got what's her name in? Ursula Andress. Now, she's beautiful. Now, I'm not saying Steve Howe was beautiful in 1970, you know, but there's a bit in that where Ursula Andress, she's actually really old, but she's been going in these flames that keep her young, and she can't get into the flames, so suddenly she ages rapidly. That's what's happened to Steve Howe. It's exactly the same thing's happened to him. You know, except he didn't start off looking like Ursula Andress. That would be a bonus if he did. I don't know. I don't know whether as a young man I would want to have watched, you know, been listening to Yes, and at the same time look at the photographs and seen the guitarist that looks like Ursula Andress. I would have been very confused. Shall I just move on for this bit of the conversation onto something else? Right, so at number 2, this is bloody obvious really. This was my number 1, and then I got all contentious. I said, no, I'm putting this one at number 1. But at number 2 I've got Neil Peart.
Magic. You know, could it have gotten any better? They not only get the benefit of a guy who, in most people's opinion, becomes the best rock drummer, certainly in the world, but is a hell of a lyricist as well.
He was our hero because he made us sound the way we wanted to sound.
It's quite bloody obvious, really, isn't it? Rush, destined for failure, got a local record deal, put their first album out. Yeah, it's great. We all love it, you know, but you're not going to become one of the biggest bands in the world by just being a copycat band, you know, of Led Zeppelin with a singer that sounds like Donald Duck on helium. That ain't going to cut it, you know. No, you need Neil Peart in the band. Do I have to explain this anymore? No, we don't. He comes in, amazing drummer, one of the greatest rock drummers of all time, but he also comes in with this vision, right? And he becomes the boss, you know. He made that band. Now, it has to be said, these recent interviews with Rick Beato, with Alex Lifeson and Geddy Lee, it's quite obvious that their change in the 1980s to all that sort of not being Rush anymore with too many keyboards, that was all bloody Neil Peart's fault as well. So, but without a doubt, Rush exists because Neil Peart joined the band, and I'm sorry to use the word Peart. When I first started this channel, I used to call him Neil Peart like I had all my life, and I got it in the neck. So because I do kowtow to you, like I changed it to Neil Peart. And now I don't know which one I'm doing. That's what happens when you can put these suggestions in the comments. You should be pronouncing it right. Okay, I'm going to have another swig of orange juice before we get to number 1. Right, number 1, I have Phil Collins joining bloody Genesis.
But I went to the Genesis audition with a friend of mine, and Peter Gabriel said that as soon as he saw me sit down on a drum stool, he knew that I was a drummer. And I got a call back for that. Not a call back, really. I got called to say I got the job. But all went slowly downhill from there.
Right, so how did Genesis start off? Well, they start off with that From Genesis to Revelation, which is the brainchild of their mentor, Jonathan King. You know, I think that we need to draw the veil of history over that album. It's rubbish anyway. No one wants to know about it, but God knows why it was made by Jonathan King. You know, he obviously had some plan to get these young posh boys out of Charterhouse and into his studio, like the Pied Piper of paedophilia. So then they get their act together and they go, we want to be like Van de Graaff Generator, and they make this album Trespass. Now, Genesis fans will say it's great, right? And I'm sure they do think it's great, I suppose. I'm sure they do. I don't like it. The Knives okay, but just go and listen to them play it live on the Genesis Live. It's way better. So that's it. It don't count. None of this counts. They got a whole bunch of namby-pamby posh boys in the band. They don't like touring and don't like doing rough stuff. I can't take it anymore. So they jump ship, don't they? And then they bring in these two bloody geniuses that make Genesis what they are. Come on, let's be honest. Phil Collins and Steve Hackett. So why is it Phil Collins and not Steve Hackett? Well, I would say when they both come in, they both play a part that's very important. And I'm not going to say, yeah, but you know, you get Phil Collins' vocals. He does his own vocal on Nursery Crime, which is very beautiful. And he brings in that groove and the virtuosity on which to lay all that. And of course, Steve Hackett's doing his amazing stuff, but you wouldn't have had that with Phil Collins. There is that argument there, but for the benefit of the doubt, I'm going to say, no, their input is equal. So imagine their input is equal. See, that my hands go backwards and forth like that is their inputs being equal there. That might give you a better idea of how they got equal inputs, right? So they got these equal inputs and they're putting their inputs in equally, okay? And so Nursery Crime, great. Foxtrot, great. Selling England by the pound, great. Even Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, great. But Peter Gabriel at that point is going, I'm going mad. I don't know what's going on now. I don't know what I want to do. I've had a baby. And I'm sitting there looking through the cage of the bloody, cot at the baby and getting all sort of weird in my head. And I'm going to concoct a really weird double album that no one will understand, and then I'll jump ship. And he jumps ship, doesn't he? And then, once he's gone, it's like Hackett doesn't have a footing in there anymore. Why? Because I think maybe Gabriel was championing Hackett so that old Tony Banks would not get control over the band. I want control over this band. I'm the genius of this band, not anybody else. I'm the one with all the compositions. Everyone should do what I say. So that's going on at that point. So Hackett say, can I have some of my compositions in the band? No. All right, then I'll jump ship and I'm do my own compositions. The Voyage of the Acolyte, which is a brilliant progressive rock album. And although, Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering are great, are they greater in terms of progginess than the Acolyte album? Now, these are all conversations that we could have here, you see. But what happens is Phil Collins steps forward. And he's brilliant. He's brilliant on those albums. And for me, Genesis is, being the age I am, it's with Phil Collins singing. Now, my mate, and I'm very proud and boastful to be able to say this, but my friend Al Murray, who was the British comedy legend, but also a big Genesis fan, of course, he thinks their greatest album is Seconds Out. Now, that's a testament to Phil Collins. That's what they pull off. They don't get worse when Gabriel leaves. In terms of musically, and Genesis fans, they do Seconds Out. That could be their greatest album. Although I like Three Sides Lives more, and I'm now comparing the two, and I'm still thinking Three Sides Lives is better, but that's another conversation to have. I know there's all these conversations to have. We will have them here, all in good time. So, but my point is that Phil Collins then goes on to really be Genesis. When they get rid of him and try it out with another singer, it doesn't work. And then he becomes the biggest selling popular artist in history, which of course would never happen if he hadn't have joined Genesis. And when you add all of that up, Collins is head and shoulders above any musician on this, it's even Neil Peart. Right? The thing he brings to Genesis is to be Genesis in a way. He becomes Genesis, and he takes Genesis from being an obscure prog band to being a household name. Now, for a little bald bloke who plays the drums, this is quite incredible. Who would have thought it? Why? Because he's a bloody genius. I don't think we quite understand the genius of Phil Collins, the talent that's there. And of course, Tony Banks is there. No, I'm the genius of this band. And then, of course, he don't bring any hits to it. Even the other one goes out with Mike and the Mechanics, doesn't he? Rutherford, the poshest of them all, and that's saying something else. The poshest of them all, Lord Rutherford goes, I might try my some popular music as well. I'll have Mike and the Mechanics. And he goes out and does that brilliantly, doesn't he? Oh, I thought I would. It didn't matter if I don't anyway, because I am a lord. He's not actually a lord, I'm just making that up. Phil Collins ain't a lord. He's proper working class, cheeky Cockney type, or at least he could play that, because he was going to be the Artful Dodger. In fact, he was the Artful Dodger because his mum was an agent and all that story. And he brings that to the table. He's an incredibly talented man. He's an incredibly talented man, one of the greatest drummers that ever lived. I don't care what anyone says. So that is the list. 10 musicians who took their band to another level. Now there's 3 singers I want to discuss here. Of course, it's really obvious. Ian Gillan. Deep Purple do 3 albums before it comes along. Nobody cares about them. Book of the Talisman, Shades of Deep Purple, and then an album called Deep Purple. I mean, what the hell's that? Is that the one with the Hieronymus Bosch cover? They didn't even come up with a cover. Stick an old paint on the front. What should we call this album? Well, what's our name? Deep Purple. We'll just call it that. Well, should we do that on the debut album? No, that was called Shades of Deep Purple. This doesn't quite make sense. Who cares? Who bloody cares? Who cares what we are? We don't know what we are. We don't know what we are. John Lord wants to do some bloody orchestral thing. That's the kiss of death. Who wants to listen to that? Some bloody rock band trying to play alongside an orchestra. Nobody wants to know about it. We've had it, We had that one hit single. The record company have kept us going. But there's no direction here. It's just a lot of this sort of, aimless psychedelic, noodling live, and a singer that can't really cut it, and they want to jump ship. Oh, what can we do? I don't know. Bloody hell, it's Ian Gillan. Thank God for that. Coming in, mate. He comes in. He's bloody brilliant. Handsome, big trouser bulge, screamy voice. He's got I mean, the Deep Purple lyrics that Gillan brings in are awful, but it suits Deep Purple. They now have this image. Deep Purple in rock is amazing. And then Troublesome Blackmore. Yeah, I know you've come in and made this band brilliant, but I don't like you and I don't want anything to do with you. Go away. And so he forces him out of the band, you know. Idiot that he is. They bring in David Cordell, equally brilliant. Glenn Hughes, amazing. They do Burn. They're back on track again. Purple are back on track again, aren't they? Yeah, I don't like it. It's too funky. You know, I'm going to work with Elf. You know, so he jumps ship, goes to work with Elf. I don't like Elf. I only like Ronnie James Dio. So that happens, and a couple of years later, I don't want Ronnie James Dio in the band. I want to be like Foreigner. Get someone with short hair in. I don't like the bloke with short hair. Get someone who's got a wig on instead. You know, and this is what happens with that. But that's another story, and I'll cover that on another video. So Gillan, yeah, he makes Deep Purple. And the same can be said, although it's lower on this list because he did not quite the same as Gillan, but Bruce Dickinson coming in really does make Iron Maiden. Now, you know, he's channeling, of course, when he comes in. He's doing a lot of channeling in the old Peter Hamill from Van der Graaf Generator, a sound I don't really like. And so I got to admit, when he came in, I don't like Dickinson's voice, you know, but it is incredible. I can appreciate its screaminess, but I like the cool sort of laconic, you know, semi-rapping of, you know, Paul Di'Anno. But for Iron Maiden to become what they are, which is basically a prog metal band, they needed someone that had the pipes to deliver that. And my God, he does. It's incredible. So Bruce Dickinson, I've got a number 2. He comes in, that's Iron Maiden. Who's the lead singer of Iron Maiden? It's Bruce Dickinson. He always will be. That's the bottom line. He makes that band what it is. And at number 3, I have to have put in Steve Perry, an incredible singer, lead singer of Journey. He comes in and turns a credible jazz rock band that does albums that all Fusions fans really like into a sort of lame, middle-of-the-road AO band. But the thing is, I love Foreigner. Right, what was the album I had by them? And I used to love it when I was a kid. I put it on the other day. I mean, maybe I don't like it as much now. What was it called? It was the one that had Back Talk on it and Separate Ways. End of the video, everybody. I'm going to have a little break now before I get onto the next video. The next one's a big one. I'm going to be doing the 10 musicians stroke bands I hate the most. This is a sort of bringing together all the hate that I've had on this channel so far. It's going to be quite an epic, so I need to go and sort myself out before we do this one. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one, everybody.